Kale Voss had not slept in 3 days, and the fifth cup of black coffee sitting on his war table had gone cold 2 hours ago. Maps covered every surface of the Iron Howl command room. Red pins marked the southern border attacks. Blue pins marked confirmed losses. There were too many blue pins. There were always too many blue pins. His beta, Jonah Mercer, stood in the doorway with the expression of a man delivering bad news to someone who had stopped flinching from it years ago. The Ashfall delegation arrived early, Jonah said. Their alpha is already in the East Wing. Kale did not look up from the map. Which alpha? Old Whitlock or the daughter? The daughter. She took over 8 months ago. You signed the recognition papers yourself. Kale remembered. He remembered everything. It was one of the curses of ruling for 23 years. Every name, every treaty, every funeral. The details piled up inside his skull like sediment, pressing down, compacting into something dense and heavy that sat behind his eyes when he tried to sleep. Fine. Put her with the others. Summit starts at noon. Jonah did not leave. He leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, and Kale could feel the question coming the way animals feel weather. Don't, Kale said. I didn't say anything. You were about to ask if I've eaten. The answer is no. You were about to follow that with something about the moon ceremony next week. The answer is still no. Actually, Jonah said, I was going to ask if you've looked in a mirror lately, because you look like reheated roadkill, and there are 5 alphas arriving today who need to believe their king has things under control. Kale lifted his head. Jonah had been his beta for 19 years. They had fought together, bled together, buried friends together. Jonah had earned the right to say things like that. It did not mean Kale had to enjoy hearing them. I have things under control. You have caffeine and stubbornness. Those are not the same thing. Kale pushed back from the table and stood. His joints protested. 47 years old, and his body had started filing complaints. His wolf, the beast that lived inside every shifter, had gone quiet years ago. Not dead, just uninterested. It lay curled in some dark corner of his consciousness, like an old dog that had stopped getting excited when someone knocked at the door. He crossed to the window. The Iron Howl compound stretched below him, a fortress of stone and timber built into the mountainside 300 years before Kale was born. His grandfather had ruled from this room. His father had died in it. Kale had expected to die in it too, alone, unmated, the last Voss to sit in this chair. The moon goddess bonded every alpha to a mate. It was the oldest law of their kind, written into blood and instinct and the pull of the lunar cycle. Every alpha found their other half. Every alpha except Kale. He had waited through his 20s with patience, through his 30s with quiet desperation, through his 40s with something worse than either: acceptance, the slow, bloodless death of hope, not in a single moment, but across 1,000 small surrenders. He stopped attending the moon ceremonies. He stopped looking at the faces of new arrivals with that unconscious question humming beneath his ribs. He stopped, and his wolf stopped with him. The goddess skipped me, he said to the window glass. His reflection stared back, silver threading through dark hair, a jaw that had forgotten how to unclench. I've made my peace with it. Jonah made a sound. It might have been a laugh. It might have been something sadder. You haven't made peace with anything in your life. You've just gotten better at pretending. Kale turned from the window. Noon. Summit room. Make sure the Ashfall Alpha has everything she needs. Jonah left. The room felt larger without him, the way rooms always feel when the one person willing to tell you the truth walks out of them. Kale picked up the cold coffee, drank it anyway. It tasted like punishment, which felt appropriate. The summit room was built for intimidation. Vaulted stone ceilings, a table carved from a single oak that had been growing when the first wolves learned to walk on 2 legs. Torches mounted in iron brackets because Kale's grandmother had refused to install electric lighting in the ceremonial spaces, and no one had argued with her then, or overruled her since. 5 chairs, 5 alphas, 5 sets of territorial ambitions wrapped in diplomatic language and the faint undercurrent of threat that accompanied every gathering of apex predators forced to share a meal. Kale sat at the head. He always sat at the head. Not because he wanted to, but because the alternative was someone else sitting there, and that someone else would be worse. Alpha Gregor Hale of the North March Pack sat to his left. Gregor was 52, barrel-chested, and smiled the way a crocodile smiles. which is to say with a lot of teeth and no warmth whatsoever. He had been a thorn in the council's side for a decade, always pushing, always probing for weakness, always framing his aggression as concern for the greater good. "Cale," Gregor said, settling into his chair like a man who expected to own it someday. "You look tired." "I am tired. 3 border settlements were hit last month. Tired seems like a reasonable response. If only the goddess had seen fit to give you a mate to share the burden." Gregor's voice dripped sympathy, the way a leaking pipe drips water. Constant, corrosive, impossible to fully ignore. Cale did not respond. He had learned decades ago that some sentences were not meant to be answered. They were meant to land. Gregor knew what he was doing. Every wolf in the room knew what he was doing. The unmated king was a fracture line in the foundation of Cale's authority, and Gregor pressed his thumb against it at every opportunity. The other alphas filed in. Marcus Cole from the Riverbend Pack, a quiet man with sharp eyes who spoke rarely and meant every word. Diana Cross from the Hollowfield Pack, who had inherited her title at 19 and defended it with a ferocity that made older wolves nervous. And then the last chair. Sarah Whitlock walked in. Cale noticed 3 things in rapid succession. She was smaller than he expected. She moved like someone who had been underestimated her entire life and had learned to use that as a weapon, and she carried a leather folder under one arm, with the calm authority of a person who had done more homework than everyone else in the room combined. She took her seat at the far end of the table, looked around, met Cale's eyes for exactly 1 second, the way you meet a stranger's eyes on a train, and then opened her folder. "Can we start?" she said. "I have a lot to cover." Gregor made a sound that was technically a chuckle. "Eager. I remember being eager." Sarah did not look at him. You would remember, it was a long time ago. Marcus Cole's mouth twitched. Diana Cross covered a smile with her hand. Cale felt something stir in his chest. Not his wolf. His wolf was still asleep. Something else. Something he did not have a name for yet. "The southern border attacks are not random," Sarah said. She pulled a stack of photographs from her folder and laid them on the table with the practiced efficiency of someone presenting evidence in court. "I have been tracking the pattern for 6 months. The targets are not villages. They are supply routes. Whoever is behind this is not trying to take territory. They are trying to cut off the southern packs from resources and force a dependency on the northern trade routes." Silence. The kind of silence that happens when someone says out loud what everyone has been afraid to think. "That is a serious accusation," Gregor said. "You are suggesting these attacks are coordinated." "I am not suggesting anything. I am showing you the data." Sarah slid a map toward the center of the table. Red lines connected the attack sites. The pattern was unmistakable. Every hit targets a junction point. Every hit occurs within 48 hours of a supply caravan schedule that is supposedly classified. Someone is feeding them information. Cale leaned forward. He studied the map. Sarah's analysis was precise and detailed, and it confirmed what his own intelligence team had suspected but could not prove. "You are saying we have a traitor," Cale said. Sarah met his eyes again. This time it lasted longer than a second. This time something moved behind her expression, something steady and unblinking, and Cale's wolf lifted its head. Just lifted its head. After a decade of silence. "I am saying the evidence supports that conclusion," Sarah said, "and I have more." She pulled out her phone, unlocked it, slid it across the table toward Cale. On the screen was a photograph of a dead rogue wolf's forearm, a tattoo, a mark Cale recognized because he had seen it once before, 20 years ago, on the arm of a mercenary who had tried to breach the Iron Howl gates during the last border war. The mark of the Ashwood Syndicate, a group that had supposedly been disbanded. Cale reached for the phone. His fingers stopped 6 inches from Sarah's hand. The air between their hands felt different, charged, like the space between a match head and the striking surface. He picked up the phone, studied the image. Put it down. "Where did you get this?" "From the body. I tracked a raiding party to their camp 3 weeks ago. We engaged. I recovered this from one of the fallen." "You engaged a raiding party? Personally?" Sarah's chin lifted half an inch. It was such a small movement. It rearranged her entire face. "I am the Alpha of Ashfall. When my people are threatened, I do not send delegates." Gregor shifted in his seat. Cale noticed. He noticed everything about Gregor today. The way you notice a crack in a dam. Small. Getting wider. The summit continued for 4 hours. They argued about troop deployments, resource allocation, intelligence sharing. Marcus Cole offered 3 sentences, each one worth more than Gregor's 30. Diana Cross proposed a joint patrol system that was elegant in its simplicity. Sarah dismantled 2 of Gregor's proposals with numbers and calm logic, never raising her voice, never flinching when Gregor's tone sharpened into something that was technically still civil, but carried the weight of a fist inside a glove. Cale watched her work. He told himself he was assessing a political ally, evaluating a potential asset, measuring the strength of the newest alpha at his table. He told himself a lot of things. At 6 in the evening, he called the recess. "We resume tomorrow. Jonah will arrange dinner." The alphas stood. Gregor left first, his smile fixed in place like something bolted on. Marcus and Diana followed, speaking in low voices. Sarah gathered her papers with the same methodical precision she had shown all day. Cale remained seated. He should have left. He had reports to read, a border to worry about, a fortress to maintain. Instead, he sat and watched Sarah Whitlock organize her folder. And his wolf watched too. She paused at the door, turned back. "Your intelligence team missed the supply route pattern," she said. "Not cruel, factual. The way a doctor tells you what the scan found." "They did. You need better analysts." "I need a lot of things." Something crossed her face. There and gone. A flicker of something that was not political, was not strategic, was not the careful mask of an alpha managing a room full of predators. Something human. "Good night, Alpha King," she said. She left. Box irritation. Cale sat in the empty summit room until the torches burned low. His wolf had settled again, but differently now. Not the dead sleep of the past decade, a lighter rest. The kind of sleep where you are half listening for a sound you have not heard yet. He went to his quarters, stood at the window. The moon was 3/4 full, hanging over the mountains like a question he had stopped asking. His phone buzzed. Jonah. "Dinner is set for 8. The Ashfall Alpha requested the library be unlocked after hours. She wants to cross-reference our border incident files." Of course she did. "Unlock it," Cale said. He set the phone down, looked at the moon. His wolf stirred again. He told it to be still. The dining hall at Iron Howl had witnessed treaties, betrayals, 3 assassination attempts, and 1 very poorly timed marriage proposal. Tonight it was serving roast venison and political theater. Cale had arranged the seating himself, which was something he never did, which was something Jonah noticed immediately and said nothing about, which was the worst kind of noticing. Sarah Whitlock sat at the far end of the table. Maximum distance. Cale told himself it was protocol. He told himself a lot of things lately. The venison was good, the wine was better, the conversation was a knife fight dressed in table manners. Gregor Hale held court at the center of the table, which was impressive given that Cale sat at the head of it. Gregor had a talent for occupying rooms. He talked about the old days, the old ways, the old certainties, and every sentence was a brick laid in a wall that was meant to surround Cale and make him look small by comparison. The old Alpha King, the tired Alpha King, the Alpha King who ruled alone, because even the goddess had decided he was not worth the trouble. Gregor never said these things directly. He never had to. He talked about his own mate, about the strength a bonded pair brings to a pack, about the sacred duty of an alpha to continue the bloodline, and every word landed on the table between them like a card turned face up. Cale ate his venison. He had been enduring this particular performance for a decade. It no longer cut. It no longer even stung. It sat against his skin like an old bruise, tender only when pressed. Marcus Cole ate in silence and watched everything. Diana Cross engaged Gregor in a debate about northern trade tariffs that was really about power and who got to wield it. And at the far end of the table, Sarah Whitlock listened. Gregor turned to her midway through his second glass of wine. "I must say, the Ashfall pack has done remarkably well for its size. Your father built something admirable. Modest, but admirable. For you." The word modest landed in the room like a dropped glass. Sarah set down her fork. She looked at Gregor with an expression Cale had seen before, on the faces of people who were about to do something very precise and very painful with nothing but words. "Thank you," she said. "We are efficient. Lean overhead, strong per capita output, 93% member retention over the last decade. She paused, took a sip of water. I understand Northmarch has been struggling with retention, and the supply chain issues from the Eastern warehouse fire last spring, and the rather public dispute with your own treasurer, which I believe resulted in an audit that found, what was the figure? 11% of PAC funds unaccounted for. The table went still. Those figures were confidential, Gregor said. His smile had not changed, but his eyes had. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had just stepped on something sharp in shallow water. They were filed with the Interpac Financial Oversight Board. I read the filings. They are quite detailed. Cale's wolf did something it had not done in years. It rumbled. Low and warm and deep in his chest. A vibration that started behind his sternum and radiated outward like heat from a stove. Not a growl, nothing aggressive. The sound a wolf makes when something pleases it beyond the capacity of silence. The bourbon went down the wrong pipe. Cale coughed. Hard. The kind of cough that turns heads because it sounds like a man is trying to expel a lung. Jonah, seated to his right, looked at him with the slow, dawning horror of a man watching a glacier calve. You all right? Jonah murmured. Fine. Cale's eyes were watering. Dry throat. Your throat has never been dry a day in its life. You drink coffee like it's oxygen. Drop it. Jonah dropped it, but he did not stop looking. He looked at Cale, and then he looked at the far end of the table where Sarah was calmly returning to her meal, as if she had not just publicly filleted one of the most powerful alphas in the territory, and then he looked back at Cale, and his expression completed a journey from confusion to suspicion to something that looked dangerously close to hope. Cale ignored him. He was very good at ignoring things. He had been practicing for 23 years. Dinner ended. The alphas dispersed to their quarters with the careful choreography of people who did not fully trust each other in hallways after dark. Cale stayed behind to discuss the security rotation with his head of guard, a conversation that took 12 minutes and accomplished very little because his mind was elsewhere, which was unacceptable, which he corrected by forcing himself to focus, which lasted exactly until the guard left and Cale's thoughts slid back to the far end of a dinner table, like water finding its level. He walked to his quarters. The route took him past the library. Light under the door. He kept walking. His quarters were at the end of the hall. 30 more steps. He could hear the sound of pages turning through the heavy oak door, which was impossible. The doors in Iron Howl were 8 inches thick. He could not actually hear pages turning. His wolf was supplying the sound from pure imagination, and the fact that his wolf was imagining anything at all after a decade of silence was a problem Cale was going to deal with later. Much later. Possibly never. 20 steps. He kept walking. 15. The library door opened behind him. Alpha King. Cale stopped. He did not turn around immediately. He gave himself 2 seconds. 2 seconds to arrange his face, his breathing, the set of his shoulders. 2 seconds to become the man he had been for 23 years. The man in control. The man who needed nothing. He turned. Sarah stood in the library doorway. She had changed from the formal dinner clothes into something simpler, a dark sweater. Her hair pulled back. Reading glasses pushed up on top of her head, which should not have been a detail worth noticing, which was a detail he was going to remember at 3 in the morning, for reasons he refused to examine. I found something in your border files, she said. You should see it. It can wait until tomorrow. It cannot. She said it without drama, without urgency, with the flat certainty of a person who had already calculated the timeline and found that waiting was not an option. Cale recognized the tone. It was the tone he used when he gave orders. Hearing it come from someone else was disorienting in a way he could not immediately categorize. He walked back to the library. The room was old and vast and smelled like leather and dust, and the particular variety of silence that accumulates in places where knowledge is stored. Sarah had spread files across one of the reading tables, maps, intercepted messages, incident reports going back 18 months. She had organized them into clusters with colored tabs that Cale's own analysts had not thought to use. Look at the dates, she said. She pointed to a sequence of attack reports. Every major hit on the southern border occurred within 72 hours of a council communication about resource deployment. Not public communications, internal ones, encrypted ones. Cale studied the timeline. She was right. The correlation was there. Obvious once someone drew the line. Invisible until then. Someone on the council is leaking deployment schedules, Cale said. Someone at this summit, Sarah said. The encryption keys rotate every quarter. Only the sitting alphas receive the new keys. The leaks started 9 months ago, which narrows the window to the current council members. They stood side by side at the table, close enough that Cale could smell her, which was an observation he wished his brain had not supplied. She smelled like pine needles and black tea, and something underneath both of those that his wolf identified before his mind could catch up. A scent that meant something in the old language of their kind. A scent that meant home and mine. And finally, he stepped away from the table. One step, then another. He needed distance, the way a drowning man needs a surface. Sarah watched him step back. Her eyes tracked the movement. She did not comment on it. She returned to the files. I have a theory about who, she said, but I need access to your communications archive to confirm it. That archive is restricted to the Alpha King. Then you had better read it yourself and tell me if I am right. She slid a piece of paper across the table. On it, she had written a name. Cale read it. His face did not change because faces were the last things an Alpha King could afford to let change, but his hands curled into fists at his sides, knuckles going white against the wood grain. Gregor Hale. He looked at Sarah. She looked back. The library was very quiet and very large, and they were the only 2 people in it, and the distance between them was 5 feet and shrinking, and Cale's wolf was no longer stirring. It was standing up. It was pressing against the inside of his ribs like a prisoner pressing against bars. It was making sounds he had never heard it make, sounds that were not growls or rumbles, but something closer to language, something that was trying to say a word his human mouth did not know how to form. I will review the archive tonight, Cale said. His voice was steady, his hands were not. He put them behind his back and hoped she had not noticed. She had noticed. He could tell by the way she did not look at his hands. People who have not noticed something do not carefully avoid looking at it. Thank you, she said. She gathered a copy of her analysis, left the originals on the table, and walked toward the door. Cale stayed by the table. He listened to her footsteps in the hallway. He counted them. 12 steps to the corner. A pause. Then the steps resumed, growing fainter, and the library settled back into its ancient silence. He picked up the paper with Gregor's name on it, looked at it for a long time. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket and went to the communications archive, where he spent the next 4 hours reading encrypted messages and finding exactly what Sarah said he would find, because Sarah Whitlock was not a woman who operated on theories she could not support. At 2 in the morning, he sat in the archive room surrounded by evidence of betrayal and thought about the way her reading glasses sat on top of her head. His wolf settled against his ribs, warm, alert, awake. He told himself it meant nothing. The following morning, Cale called an emergency session, not in the summit room, in the smaller strategy chamber off the east wing, where the walls were thicker and the doors locked from the inside. Jonah stood by the entrance with 2 of Iron Howl's senior guards. The message was clear. This was not a discussion. This was a reckoning. The Alphas arrived one by one. Marcus Cole first, alert and reading the room before he crossed the threshold. Diana Cross second, her eyes moving from the guards to Jonah to the locks, with the rapid calculation of someone who grew up having to know where every exit was. Gregor third, his smile in place, his confidence a flag planted in soil he did not realize was shifting beneath him. Sarah last, carrying her leather folder, wearing an expression that gave away nothing. Cale stood at the head of the table. He did not sit. Standing was a choice. Standing said this would not take long. Last night, I reviewed 18 months of council communications and cross-referenced them with the timeline of southern border attacks, he said. No preamble, no politics. The correlation is exact. Every attack follows a classified deployment communication by 48 to 72 hours. The encryption keys are held only by sitting alphas. One of the people in this room has been feeding intelligence to the Ashwood Syndicate. The room went tight. Marcus Cole's eyes narrowed. Diana Cross's hand moved to the edge of the table, a reflexive gesture, a body preparing itself. Gregor's smile held, but his shoulders shifted backward by half an inch, the kind of micro-movement that only another predator would catch. Sarah opened her folder. The pattern analysis is here, she said. She laid the documents on the table with the same calm she had shown the day before. Dates, targets, communication logs. and the decoded routing signatures on the intercepted messages. The routing originates from a node registered to the North March Pack communication network. Every eye in the room moved to Gregor. His smile finally died. What replaced it was worse. Calculation, the rapid, cold arithmetic of a man deciding how many bridges he could afford to burn. "This is absurd," he said. "This girl has been alpha for 8 months. She barely has standing to sit at this table. And now she accuses me of treason based on, what? Some colored tabs and a map?" "Based on your own communication records," Cale said, "which I verified personally, last night, for 4 hours. Gregor looked at Cale, looked at him the way a man looks at a wall he has been pushing against for years, testing for weakness, and finding it solid for the first time. "You verified them on the word of a 28-year-old girl from a pack half the size of mine. I verified them on the evidence. The evidence does not care how old she is or how big her pack is." Gregor stood. His chair scraped against stone. The sound was ugly, the sound of something tearing. "You are making a mistake, Cale. You are old, and you are tired, and you are alone. And one day, this council will remember that an unmated king is a broken promise to the goddess. And when that day comes, I will be standing where you are standing." He walked out. The guards let him pass. Cale had not ordered containment. Not yet. There was a difference between evidence and proof. And Gregor still had allies, still had leverage, still had the political weight of the largest pack north of the river. The door closed behind him. The room exhaled. Marcus Cole spoke for the first time. He did not deny it. Diana Cross leaned back in her chair. "He never does. He redirects. Every time. Have you noticed that? He has never once in 10 years directly answered a direct question." Cale sat down. The standing was over. What remained was the sitting, the waiting, the slow work of building a case that could not be deflected or redirected or buried under Gregor's considerable talent for political survival. He looked at Sarah. She was organizing her papers. Calm. Methodical. As if she had not just publicly accused the most dangerous alpha in the territory of funding a war. "That was a risk," Cale said. Sarah looked up. "Leading is a risk. I did not take this title to play it safe." Something in his chest rearranged itself. A shifting of weight. A redistribution of a load he had been carrying alone for so long that he had forgotten it was possible to set part of it down. His wolf pressed against his ribs. He did not tell it to be still. The days after the confrontation settled into a rhythm that Cale found increasingly difficult to manage. Not the political fallout. He had managed political fallout for decades. Gregor had retreated to his quarters, making calls, consolidating support, doing what cornered men do when the walls start closing, which is reach for anyone who might help them push back. That part was familiar. That part was chess. The part Cale could not manage was Sarah Whitlock. She did not chase him. That was the problem. If she had pursued him, if she had manufactured reasons to stand close, or engineered conversations about the bond, or shown up at his door with questions that were really invitations, he would have known what to do. He had spent 23 years building defenses against hope, and those defenses were designed for a siege. They were designed for someone trying to get in. Sarah was not trying to get in. She was already inside. She trained with his warriors at dawn. Cale learned this on the second morning, when he walked past the training yard on his way to the strategy room, and saw her sparring with 2 of his best fighters simultaneously. She was fast, not strong in the way that large wolves were strong, not built for brute force, but fast in the way that light is fast, in the way that water finds cracks in stone, in the way that made the 2 wolves she was fighting look like they were moving through mud. She won. Both rounds. Cale kept walking. His wolf howled inside his skull so loudly that he stumbled on the stone steps, caught himself on the railing, and stood there for 3 seconds with his knuckles white against the iron, while the sound ricocheted through his bones. He told himself he was coming down with something. By the 4th day, Sarah had integrated herself into the investigation with a completeness that left no room for his avoidance to operate. She met with his intelligence team in the morning. She reviewed intercepts with his communications officer after lunch. She ate dinner at the same table, at the same far end, making no effort to move closer, speaking to him only when the conversation required it, and with the same professional distance she would show any allied alpha. The distance was maddening. The distance was exactly what he had arranged by putting her at the far end of the table, and it was the worst decision he had ever made, and he could not undo it without admitting why he had made it. And admitting why he had made it would require acknowledging something that lived in his chest now, something with weight and warmth and a heartbeat he could feel when the room went quiet. Jonah cornered him on the fifth evening. They were in Cale's private study, a room that smelled like old books and whiskey, and the particular variety of loneliness that accumulates in spaces where a man spends too many nights alone. Jonah closed the door, leaned against it. His arms were crossed and his face held the expression of someone who had rehearsed this conversation and was going to deliver it regardless of the reception. "You need to talk about it," Jonah said. "About Gregor?" "Yes. I have the legal framework for a formal investigation drafted. If you look at the provisions under the Interpack Accord, Section 7, Subsection 3, and not about Gregor." Cale set down his pen. "Then about what?" Jonah's jaw tightened. He was a big man. Broad shoulders, scarred hands, a face that had been broken and reset more times than either of them could count. But in this moment, he looked like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether the truth was worth the fall. "I have watched you bury yourself alive for 20 years, Jonah said. "I have watched you stand at every moon ceremony with that smile. I have watched you congratulate every alpha who found their mate while your wolf went quieter and quieter, until I was not sure it was still there. I have watched you take the loneliest job in the territory and make it lonelier because you decided that if the goddess was not going to give you what everyone else got, then you were going to pretend you never wanted it. And I said nothing. For 20 years I said nothing, because I thought it was not my place, and I was wrong, and I am done being wrong." The study was very quiet. "She is 28, Cale said. "Yes, I have gray hair. Yes, I have scars older than she is. Cale, brother." Jonah uncrossed his arms. His hands hung at his sides. "Open. The goddess does not make mistakes. She makes you wait. And sometimes the wait is so long that you forget you were waiting, and that is the cruelest part. Because when the answer finally comes, you have already decided the question was never going to be answered." Cale stared at his oldest friend. Something cracked inside his chest, not broken, cracking the way ice cracks in spring, the first fracture before the thaw, the sound that means something frozen is remembering how to move. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, his voice was the voice of a man holding something fragile. "What if she deserves better than a tired king with an empty house?" Jonah laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had heard the stupidest thing ever spoken aloud and could not contain his response. "You are the Alpha King. You have held this territory together through 3 border wars, 2 attempted coups, and a financial crisis that would have collapsed any lesser pack. You have buried friends and kept fighting. You have gone without a mate for 23 years, and never once let it weaken your rule, or your commitment to the people who depend on you. You are the best man I know, and if you think she deserves better, then you are also the dumbest man I know." Cale opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Get out of my study. Gladly. Go talk to her." "Get out." Jonah left. He was smiling. Cale could hear it in his footsteps, which was irrational, because footsteps do not smile, but these ones did. He did not go talk to her. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and listened to his wolf pace inside him, back and forth, a restless circuit that matched the restless circuit of his thoughts. And somewhere around midnight, he accepted, in the privacy of his own silence, that the ice was cracking, and there was nothing he could do to freeze it back. The attack came at 3 in the morning. Cale was still awake when the first alarm sounded. A deep, bone-rattling horn that echoed through the stone corridors of Iron Howl and turned sleep into adrenaline in the space of a single breath. He was on his feet before the sound faded, boots on, moving through the dark hallway with the muscle memory of a man who had lived in this fortress his entire life and knew its bones better than he knew his own. Jonah met him at the junction of the east wing. His face was tight, blood on his knuckles already. "Breach in the east perimeter," Jonah said. 3 rogues. They came over the wall. How did they get past the sensors? They did not. The sensors were disabled. Someone turned them off from inside the compound. Cale's blood went cold, not metaphorically. He felt the temperature drop, felt the heat leave his hands and feet as his body redirected everything to his core, to his muscles, to the machinery of survival. Where? East Wing, heading toward the guest quarters. The guest quarters. where the visiting alphas were housed. Where Sarah was housed, Cale ran. Not walked, not jogged. Ran. Full speed through stone corridors, his wolf surging forward inside him, with a force that nearly triggered the shift, nearly tore through his skin, and replaced his human body with the massive black beast that lived beneath it. He held the shift back by will alone, but it cost him in concentration and control, and the thin veneer of calm that separated the Alpha King from the animal underneath. He turned the corner to the East Wing corridor, and the smell hit him first. Blood. Wolf blood. And beneath it, the sharp electric tang of a shifted rogue, a wolf running on whatever chemical cocktail the Syndicate was pumping into its soldiers. 2 of his guards were down, not dead, breathing, knocked aside by something faster and stronger than a standard rogue should have been. Cale stepped over them and followed the blood trail to the 3rd door on the left. Sarah's door. It was open. He stepped through it and stopped. Sarah was standing in the center of the room. She was breathing hard. Her left shoulder was bleeding, a claw wound. 4 parallel lines that seeped red through the torn fabric of her shirt. At her feet lay a rogue wolf, unconscious, its jaw broken at an angle that suggested it would not be using that jaw again anytime soon. She had fought it off, alone, in a room with no weapons, against a chemically enhanced rogue that had already gone through 2 of Cale's trained guards. She looked up at him. She did not look at him the way a rescued person looks at a rescuer. There was no relief, no gratitude, no collapse. She looked at him the way you look at a locked door you have knocked on 100 times and have finally decided to stop knocking on. Not angry, past angry, settled into something quieter and more final than anger. She looked at him like she was done waiting. His wolf broke something inside him. Not a wall, not a barrier, something deeper, something structural. The architecture of his loneliness, the framework he had built over 23 years of sleeping alone and ruling alone, and telling himself that alone was the shape his life was meant to take. It crumbled, not with a crash, with a whisper. The way old buildings come down when the last support gives way, and everything that was held up by stubbornness finally settles to the ground. He crossed the room. 3 steps. Each one was a year surrendered. Each one was a lie abandoned. He did not touch her wound. He touched her jaw, gently. The way you touch something you are afraid to break, and more afraid to let go of. His thumb crossed the line of blood on her cheek, and his hand was shaking, and he could not stop it, and he did not try. She was looking at him, looking up at him with those eyes that had tracked him across conference tables and hallways and the careful distances he had constructed between them, and in those eyes he saw something he had not seen directed at him in his entire life. Not admiration, not political calculation, not the careful respect that lesser wolves showed the king. Patience, the deep, immovable patience of someone who had known exactly what he was, and had waited for him to know it too. He said her name, just her name, 2 syllables that felt like a language he should have been born speaking. Sarah. She reached up. Her hand covered his where it rested against her jaw. Her fingers were smaller than his, and stronger than he expected, and warm in a way that radiated up his arm and into his chest, and settled against the place where his wolf lived, and his wolf went quiet. Not the dead quiet of the past decade, a different quiet. The quiet of something that has found what it was looking for and does not need to make noise about it. Your shoulder, he said. It is a scratch. It is bleeding. Most scratches do. He almost smiled. It had been so long since he had almost smiled that the muscles felt unfamiliar, like a door hinge that had rusted shut and was being forced open for the first time. I should have been here, he said. You are here now. I should have been here sooner. I should have been a lot of things sooner. She tilted her head, studied him the way she studied maps and intelligence reports, with that careful analytical gaze that missed nothing and forgave everything. You were not ready sooner, she said, and that is fine. It was the simplest sentence anyone had ever said to him, and it dismantled every defense he had left. He stepped closer. His forehead touched hers. They stood like that in the wrecked room, with the unconscious rogue on the floor, and the blood on the wall, and the broken lock on the door, and the world outside could wait, because the world outside had been waiting for 23 years, and it could wait a few minutes more. I am too old for you, he whispered. You are exactly the right age to be the man I was born to stand beside. I have nothing to offer except a cold fortress and a war. I did not come here for comfort. I came here because the moon goddess told my wolf that the man I was meant for was stubborn and scared and worth every year I spent looking for him. His wolf pressed against his ribs, not pushing, leaning, the way a tired animal leans against the one thing in the world that makes it feel safe. He pulled back, looked at her, the blood on her cheek, the claw marks on her shoulder, the reading glasses that were, impossibly, still on top of her head, slightly crooked from the fight. You fought a rogue in your reading glasses, he said. I was reviewing your communications archive when it broke through the window. I did not have time to take them off. You were reviewing my archive at 3 in the morning. I had a theory I wanted to test. About Gregor? About whether the intercept timestamps aligned with Gregor's personal travel schedule? They do. She had been attacked by a chemically enhanced rogue wolf, and her first instinct was to finish her analysis. Cale looked at her, really looked at her, not through the filter of age or protocol or the calcified grief of a man who had given up on this exact moment. He looked at her the way his wolf had been looking at her since the first second she walked into the summit room. Like she was the answer, not to a question, to everything. Come with me, he said. My quarters are secure. I will have the medic meet us there. I do not need a medic. I need a secure terminal to send a message to my beta at Ashfall. If Gregor sent a rogue here, he is making his move tonight, and my pack needs to be on alert. Even now, even bleeding, even standing in the aftermath of an attack meant to take her life, she was working. He did not know when exactly the last piece of his resistance fell away. It might have been then. It might have been the reading glasses. It might have been earlier, in the library, or at the summit table, or the first time she opened her mouth and said something that made Gregor Hale flinch. It did not matter when. It only mattered that it was done. I will get you the terminal, he said, and the medic. And then we are going to have a conversation that I should have had the courage to start 5 days ago. Sarah looked at him. The patience in her eyes shifted, warmed, became something closer to the expression she had worn in the hallway that first night, when she had whispered 3 words that had cracked open the sealed chamber of his chest and let the air in. I know, she said. I have been waiting. The medic came and went. Sarah sat on the edge of Cale's desk chair while a quiet woman named Claire cleaned and bandaged the claw marks on her shoulder. Cale stood by the door with his arms crossed, watching the process with an intensity that made Claire's hands shake slightly, which made him step back, which made Sarah look at him with one eyebrow raised, which made his wolf make that warm rumbling sound again. He was going to have to get that under control. Sarah sent her message to Ashfall. Her beta, a man named Owen Thorne, responded within 3 minutes. Ashfall was going to full alert. Patrols doubled, borders sealed. Owen asked if she needed extraction. Sarah typed back a single word. No. Claire left. The door closed. The room shrank to the 2 of them, and the silence between them, which was not empty anymore. It was full. Full of the things neither of them had said, and the things both of them knew, and the strange, disorienting gravity that pulled them toward each other, with a force that Cale had stopped pretending, was anything other than what it was. You have questions, Sarah said. Hundreds. Start with 1. He looked at her. The bandage on her shoulder, the steadiness in her eyes, the way she sat in his chair like she belonged in it, which she did, which was a thought that rewired something fundamental in the way he understood his own life. How long have you known? She tilted her head. Known what? That you are my mate, or that you were going to fight it? Both. I felt it the moment I walked into the summit room. The bond does not announce itself gently, in my experience. It arrives like a verdict. She paused. As for fighting it, I knew the moment I saw your face. You looked at me the way a man looks at a fire when he has been cold for a very long time, and then you looked away, and I thought, this man has been cold for so long that he has forgotten what warmth is for. Cale sat down. Heavily. The chair protested. His bones protested. Everything protested except his wolf, which had settled into a calm he had never felt before, a deep and steady warmth that radiated from his core outward and made the stone walls of his fortress feel, for the first time, like home. 23 years, he said. She waited. 23 years I attended every moon ceremony and watched every alpha I know find their mate. I stood there and smiled. I shook hands and offered congratulations, and went home to an empty house and told myself that it was fine, that the goddess had her reasons, that maybe I was meant to serve differently, that maybe the pack was my mate, the territory, the duty. He stopped. The words were difficult, not because they were complicated, but because they were true, and truth, after 2 decades of practiced indifference, felt like speaking a foreign language with a mouth that had forgotten how to form the sounds. And then one day, I stopped going. I stopped waiting. I took down the mirrors in my quarters because I was starting to look like my father, and my father died alone in this room, in this chair, and his wolf went silent, 3 years before his heart did, and I thought, this is it. This is the shape of my life. I am my father's son, and I will die my father's death, and that is just what the goddess decided. Sarah's hand moved to cover his. She did not grip, she rested. The contact was light and warm, and it sent a current through his skin that his wolf answered with a sound like a song, low and sustained and ancient. Your father was not your future, she said. He was your fear. 1 sentence, 7 words. He felt them land the way you feel, a key turn in a lock that has been jammed for years. The click, the release, the door swinging open onto a room you forgot existed. I was not skipped, he said. Not a question. You were never skipped. I just was not born yet. He looked at their hands. His, scarred and weathered, knuckles split from this morning's fight. Hers, smaller, bandaged at the wrist from the rogue's attack. 2 hands that should not fit together and did. He turned his palm up. Her fingers laced through his. His wolf leaned against his ribs and settled. And the settling was so profound, so complete, that Cale felt tears in his eyes, for the first time in a decade, and did not fight them. They sat in the quiet room while the night turned toward dawn, and the compound hummed with the aftermath of the breach, and somewhere out there, Gregor Hale was making his next move, and none of it mattered as much as the weight of her hand in his. The claiming happened the next night, not as a ceremony, not as a political statement. It happened in the way that inevitable things happen, without announcement, without staging, without the performance that Cale had spent his entire adult life perfecting. They were in the strategy room. The sun had gone down an hour earlier. The others had left. Maps and reports covered the table. They had been working side by side for 11 hours, piecing together the full scope of Gregor's betrayal, tracing money and weapons and communications through a network that stretched across 3 territories and involved mercenaries, corrupt border officials, and at least 2 pack treasurers who had been on Gregor's payroll for years. Sarah reached for a file at the same time Cale did. Their hands collided over the stack of papers. Neither pulled away. Cale looked at her. She looked at him. The room was empty, and the light was low, and outside the wind moved through the mountains with the sound of something vast and patient. I am going to do something, he said, and I need you to tell me if it is what you want. You are going to claim me, she said, and yes, it is what I want. It has been what I want since the moment I walked through your door. He stood. She stood. The 6 inches between them collapsed. He kissed her, not the way kings kiss, not with authority or possession or the political calculus that attended every other physical gesture he made. He kissed her the way a man kisses the person he has been looking for since before he knew he was looking. With terror, with relief, with the accumulated weight of 23 years of empty rooms and silent wolves and nights spent staring at a 3/4 moon and wondering what was wrong with him. Nothing was wrong with him. He had just been waiting. The claiming mark appeared where his lips met the curve of her neck, the ancient bond signature that no wolf could fake or deny, the goddess's seal on a connection that transcended politics and packs and the opinions of men like Gregor Hale. Sarah marked him in return. Her claim settled against his throat like a second heartbeat, and his wolf went still with a completeness that felt like the silence after a storm, the kind of silence that is not absence but fulfillment. They stood in the strategy room with maps of betrayal spread across the table and the mark of the bond still warm on their skin, and neither of them spoke, because some things exist beyond language, and this was one of them. Jonah found out at breakfast. He walked into the dining hall, saw Cale and Sarah sitting side by side at the head of the table, saw the mark on Cale's throat visible above his collar, and stopped walking. His coffee cup tilted in his hand. he did not seem to notice. He stood in the doorway of the dining hall of Iron Howl with coffee dripping onto his boots, and his face performing an entire opera of emotion in the space of 5 seconds. He set the cup down, walked to the table, sat across from them, looked at Cale, looked at Sarah, looked at the marks. Looked at Cale again. "About time," he said. "That is all you have to say? I have been preparing a speech for 20 years. You robbed me of the moment by doing it in a strategy room instead of at a moon ceremony where I could have wept openly. So yes, about time. That is all you get." Sarah hid a smile behind her tea. Cale did not bother hiding his. The news traveled fast. By noon, every wolf in Iron Howl knew that the Alpha King had claimed a mate. The compound's mood shifted in ways that were difficult to quantify and impossible to ignore. Guards stood straighter. The kitchen staff sang while they worked. 2 junior wolves who had been feuding over patrol assignments shook hands without being asked. The bond was not just between Cale and Sarah. It was a current that ran through the pack, a signal that the throne was whole, that the king was not alone, that the fracture at the center of their world had finally been sealed. Marcus Cole nodded when he heard. That was all. One nod. From Marcus, it was a standing ovation. Diana Cross found Sarah in the library that afternoon and hugged her. No words, just a hug. One alpha woman to another, acknowledging something that went beyond politics. Gregor Hale received the news by encrypted message from one of his informants, still inside the compound. He read it again. Then he picked up his phone and made 7 calls in 90 minutes. The first 2 went to the alphas of the Stonebrook and Blackwater packs, both of whom owed Gregor debts they had hoped never to repay. The third went to his own beta, a man named Victor Crane, who had served Gregor not out of loyalty, but out of fear and the practical understanding that the alternative was worse. The remaining 4 went to mercenary contacts, weapons suppliers, and a woman in the capital who could arrange for communications to be jammed within a 50-mile radius for exactly 6 hours. Gregor was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a man who redefined the playing field until defeat became someone else's problem. 3 days after the claiming, he made his move. The formal challenge arrived at Iron Howl by courier, written in the old language, sealed with the North March insignia, and addressed to the Council of Alphas. It invoked Article 9 of the Founding Accord, the ancient provision that allowed any alpha to challenge the fitness of the ruling king if they could demonstrate a breach of sacred duty. The charge was simple. An alpha king who remained unmated for 23 years had violated the goddess's covenant. The recent claiming was a political act, not a divine bond, undertaken only after the accusation of treason had been made public. The bond was fraudulent. The king was unfit. The throne was vacant. Cale read the challenge in his study with Sarah beside him, and Jonah at the door. His face did not change. His hands did not shake. He folded the letter and set it on the desk with the careful precision of a man placing a piece on a chessboard. "He cannot prove the bond is false," Sarah said. "The mark is real. Every wolf who comes close enough to sense it will know it is real." "He does not need to prove it," Cale said. "He needs to create enough doubt to split the council. If Stonebrook and Blackwater back his challenge, it goes to a vote. 3 against 2. The throne falls. And then what? Then Gregor becomes the Alpha King. And the first thing he does is shut down the treason investigation, and the rogue attacks resume, and the southern border falls, and every pack south of the river becomes dependent on North March trade routes, which Gregor controls, which was the point all along." Sarah's eyes were steady. "Then we do not let the throne fall. It may not be up to us. Stonebrook and Blackwater have been under Gregor's influence for years. If he has promised them territory or trade concessions, they will vote with him regardless of the evidence. Then we take the vote away from him. We do not defend, we attack." Cale looked at her. His mate. The words still felt new, bright and strange in his mouth, like a coin from a foreign country. "What are you proposing?" "I am proposing that we stop waiting for Gregor to set the terms and start setting them ourselves. He sent rogues into this compound. He funded attacks on the southern border. He disabled your security systems from inside your own walls. Those are not political maneuvers. Those are acts of war. And acts of war are not decided by council vote. They are decided by alphas." She was right. She was absolutely right. And the fact that she was right was less surprising than the fact that hearing her say it made his wolf surge forward with a fierce, burning pride that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the fact that the woman standing in front of him was a force that Gregor Hale had catastrophically underestimated. "Jonah," Cale said. "Already on it," Jonah said from the doorway. He had his phone in his hand. "Full alert. All personnel. I am calling in the reserves from the eastern outposts and requesting Diana and Marcus mobilize their personal guard details." Cale nodded. He looked at Sarah. "Call Owen. Tell Ashfall to march." Sarah smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who had spent her entire life being called small and had decided to show everyone exactly how much damage small could do. She picked up the phone. The Ashfall Wolves arrived at Iron Howl in 2 waves. The first wave, 30 fighters led by Owen Thorne, reached the gates at dawn. They had traveled through the night without rest, without complaint, without questioning why their alpha had asked them to march into another pack's war. They came because Sarah asked. That was enough. Owen Thorne was not what Cale expected. He was tall and lean and quiet, with the kind of stillness that comes from years of standing behind a leader and watching everything while saying nothing. He shook Cale's hand with a grip that communicated exactly 2 things: respect for the title, and a clear promise that if anything happened to Sarah, the title would not protect him. Cale understood. He would have felt the same way. The second wave arrived 3 hours later. 40 more fighters, plus a mobile communications unit that Ashfall had developed in-house, a portable system that ran on a separate encryption protocol from the Council network, which meant Gregor's jamming equipment would not touch it. "You built your own comms system?" Cale asked Sarah, watching her technicians set up the equipment in the east courtyard. "After the leaks started, I stopped trusting the Council network. Owen designed the encryption. It is basic but clean." "Basic but clean" is exactly what we need. Diana Cross arrived with her Hollowfield Guard at noon. 15 fighters. Not many, but Diana's wolves were trained in urban combat and close-quarters defense, which made them worth 3 times their number in a fortress siege scenario. Marcus Cole sent word that he was bringing his personal detail of 20 wolves and would arrive by nightfall. By sunset, Iron Howl had transformed. The fortress that had felt hollow for years, too large for its lonely king, too quiet in its empty halls, was now alive. Wolves moved through the corridors with purpose. The training yard rang with sparring. The kitchen operated in shifts to feed the swelling population. And at the center of it, in the strategy room, where maps covered every surface, and the air hummed with radio chatter and the low, urgent voices of commanders planning for what was coming, Cale and Sarah worked side by side. They did not touch in public, not because of shame or strategy, but because some things belong to the quiet hours, to the moments between the planning and the execution, to the space where 2 people who found each other late can exist without the weight of the world pressing against them. They saved the touching for the stolen minutes when the room emptied. A hand on a shoulder, a forehead pressed to a forehead, the bond mark on Cale's throat pulsing warm when she was near and dimming when she was not, a compass needle that always pointed toward her. Gregor's army reached the valley below Iron Howl at 3 in the morning on the 7th day. Cale stood on the north wall and watched them come. Torches in the darkness, moving through the tree line like a river of fire. North March wolves. Stonebrook wolves. Blackwater wolves. And among them, the fast-moving shapes of rogues, the Ashwood Syndicate mercenaries that Gregor had been funding for 18 months, finally deployed in the open for the purpose they had always been intended for, taking the throne. Jonah stood beside him. Both men were in combat gear. Both men had done this before, but this time was different, and they both knew it. This time Cale had something to protect that was not a territory, or a political position, or an abstract concept of duty. This time he had a person. The difference sat in his chest like a second heartbeat, insistent and terrifying, and clarifying in a way that nothing else had ever been. "How many?" Cale asked. "Scouts estimate 200, maybe 250 with the mercenaries. And us?" 125, including the reserves, Ashfall, Hollowfield, and Riverbend. Outnumbered, nearly 2 to 1. Cale had fought worse odds. He had not fought worse odds with this much to lose. "Sarah takes the eastern flank," he said. Jonah hesitated. 1 second. Just enough for Cale to see it. She is an alpha. She fights. That was not a question. I know. I just wanted to make sure you had actually thought about it, and were not running on some king of the mountain instinct that says the mate stays in the castle. If I tried to put Sarah in a castle, she would walk out, take command of the nearest available unit, and win the battle without me, and then she would never let me forget it. Jonah smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes and stays there. Fair enough. The battle started at first light. Gregor was not a stupid man. He attacked on 3 fronts simultaneously: the north wall, the east gate, and the underground passage that ran beneath the fortress to the river, an ancient escape route that only the oldest families knew about. Gregor knew about it because the Hale family had helped build Iron Howl 300 years ago, a fact that Cale had always known but never considered as a tactical liability until this moment. The north wall held. Cale led the defense himself, standing at the breach point where Gregor's wolves hit hardest, fighting in human form because the wall was too narrow for shifted wolves to maneuver. He fought with a blade in one hand and his wolf surging beneath his skin, lending speed and strength, and the particular kind of endurance that comes from being bonded, from knowing that somewhere on the other side of the fortress, the person who completed him was fighting too, and he could feel her heartbeat threaded through his own, like a wire pulled taut. Pain, not his, a spike of sharp, white-hot pain that flared in his left shoulder, and he staggered, and for one terrible second, he thought he had been hit, but his shoulder was untouched. The pain was Sarah's, coming through the bond, a cut, a blow, something that sent fire through her nerve endings and echoed in his. He fought harder, drove forward. The bond was a liability and an asset simultaneously, showing him her pain, but also showing him her fury, her determination, the unbreakable engine of her will that did not slow, or flag, or hesitate. The eastern flank was where the battle turned. Gregor had sent his best unit to take the east gate. 50 wolves, half of them rogues, all of them aimed at the point where the fortress wall met the mountain slope, the weakest structural point in the compound's defenses. He expected the east flank to fall within the first hour. He expected the fall to split the defenders and open a path to the inner compound. He expected, because he had always expected, that the small alpha from the small pack would be the weakest link in the chain. Sarah had positioned 30 of her Ashfall wolves and 10 of Diana's Hollowfield fighters along the eastern wall. She had spent 2 days studying the terrain, mapping the approach angles, identifying the choke points where a smaller force could leverage geography against numbers. She had Owen Thorne commanding the reserve unit behind the tree line to the south, waiting for the signal to close the trap. When Gregor's eastern assault hit, it hit hard. The first wave of rogues came over the wall with the chemical fury of the Syndicate's enhancement drugs burning through their systems, faster and stronger than natural wolves, running on something that was not courage and was not instinct, but the synthetic approximation of both. Sarah met them on the wall. She fought in human form for the first 3 minutes, using the narrow walkway to neutralize the rogues' speed advantage, channeling them into single combat where technique mattered more than raw power. She dropped 2 rogues with a combination that Cale would later learn she had developed herself, a low sweep that targeted the artificially enhanced wolves' one weakness, their ankles, which bore the strain of the chemical augmentation poorly and buckled under lateral force. The third rogue broke through. It was bigger than the others, faster, running hot with whatever cocktail was coursing through its blood. It got past her guard, and its claws found her side, 4 lines of fire that tore through her tactical vest and drew blood. She did not fall. She did not scream. She shifted. Her wolf was silver white, smaller than Cale's massive black form by a third. But speed is its own kind of strength, and precision is its own kind of power, and Sarah's wolf moved through the chaos on that wall with a fluidity that made the rogues look like they were fighting underwater. She took the big rogue down with a strike to the throat that was part instinct, part geometry, and part the quiet fury of a woman who had spent her entire adult life hearing the word little from men who never saw her coming. Gregor's eastern assault broke. Not retreated, broke. His wolves pulled back in disarray, leaving their dead on the wall, and Sarah's forces surged forward through the gap. Owen's reserve unit came out of the tree line, 50 wolves, fresh and fast, hitting Gregor's eastern flank from behind, while Sarah held the front. The pincer closed. Gregor's eastern force was trapped between the wall and the forest. between Sarah above and Owen below, and the fight went out of them the way air goes out of a punctured tire, not all at once, but in a sustained hiss of collapse. Cale felt it through the bond. The surge of triumph, the ache of wounds, the exhaustion that came after the adrenaline and before the accounting. He pushed forward on the north wall with renewed force, his wolf howling inside him with a sound that was not victory, but something older and wilder and more fundamental. Pride, bone-deep, world-shaking pride in the woman he had almost been too scared to love. The north wall attack was a diversion. Cale realized this as Gregor's northern forces began to thin, pulling back in coordinated waves, retreating not in defeat, but in redirection. The real assault was the underground passage. Gregor himself was leading a team through the ancient tunnel, bypassing both walls, aiming for the inner compound where the throne room and communications center sat undefended. Jonah caught it first. His instincts were older than strategy, honed by 2 decades of watching for the angle no one else saw. "He is not here," Jonah said, scanning the retreating northern force. "Gregor is not on this wall. He is not on the eastern approach. He is underground." Cale vaulted from the wall. Shifted mid-fall, his wolf hit the courtyard stones at a full sprint, heading for the tunnel entrance that lay beneath the great hall, sealed by a door that had not been opened in 40 years and had been designed to keep enemies out, not to stop a man who had the original construction blueprints. He reached the tunnel entrance and found it open. The seal had been cut. The passage yawned dark and narrow ahead of him, sloping downward into the mountain's belly, and the scent of Gregor Hale filled the space like smoke. Cale went in. The tunnel was tight, too tight for a shifted wolf. He changed back, human form, moving fast through the darkness with one hand on the stone wall, and his senses stretched to their limit. He could smell Gregor ahead of him, could smell the 3 wolves with him, their sweat and fear, and the chemical tang of the rogue enhancement cocktail. He found them in the junction chamber, the wide underground room, where the tunnel split into 3 branches, one leading to the Great Hall, one to the river, one to the old armory. Gregor stood in the center with his 3 wolves, and a look on his face that was not surprise, because Gregor had planned for this possibility, but was not triumph either, because Cale stood between him and the throne, and Cale was not moving. "You should have stayed on the wall," Gregor said. "This does not have to end with both of us bleeding. You funded the attacks that killed my people. You sent a rogue to murder my mate. You are standing in my home with weapons drawn, and you want to talk about how this ends. I am standing in a home that should have been mine 20 years ago. An unmated king is a weakness. I am correcting a weakness." Cale looked at Gregor Hale, really looked at him, past the smile that had been bolted on for a decade, past the political maneuvering, past the careful cultivation of alliances and leverage, and the slow, patient work of undermining everything Cale had built. He looked at the man underneath and saw what he had always seen. Fear. Gregor was afraid. Afraid of a world where he was not the most powerful person in the room. Afraid that competence without crown was not enough. Afraid that if he stopped pushing, stopped grabbing, stopped consuming, the universe would correct the accident of his prominence, and he would be revealed as what he truly was. A man whose ambition had outgrown his character. Cale fought. The 3 rogues came first, fast and drugged and expendable. He took them down in sequence. The first with a strike to the jaw that dropped him unconscious. The second with a chokehold that used the wolf's own momentum against him. The third put up a real fight. Claws found Cale's arm. Blood ran. Pain flared. Through the bond, he felt Sarah's answering spike of fear, felt her attention snap toward him across the battlefield, felt her wolf surge with protective fury. He put the 3rd rogue down with a move he had learned from his father 30 years ago, a move that used weight and leverage to turn a larger opponent's strength into a disadvantage, and the rogue hit the stone floor and did not get up. Gregor. They faced each other in the junction chamber. The light was bad, the air was stale, the ground was stone, and it was slick with water that seeped through the mountain in thin, persistent streams. Gregor shifted. His wolf was large, gray and scarred and heavy with muscle, a predator built for dominance, for the kind of fight that ended with one wolf standing and the other on the ground. Cale shifted. His wolf was black, bigger than Gregor's but older. The joints ached. The reflexes were half a second slower than they had been a decade ago. But the bond hummed through him like a live wire, and the bond carried Sarah's strength alongside his own. and the combined force of two bonded wolves was something Gregor had never faced and had fatally underestimated. The fight was not long. Gregor expected a tired king fighting on fumes, fighting out of obligation, fighting because the chair required it. He got a bonded alpha with a mate on the eastern wall and a pack full of wolves who believed in him, and a wolf that was no longer silent, no longer dormant, no longer the half-dead thing that had been curled in the dark corners of his consciousness for a decade. Cale's wolf was awake, fully, completely, ferociously awake, and it fought the way that awake things fight when they have finally found the one thing worth fighting for. Gregor went down, not dead, down, pinned against the stone with Cale's jaws at his throat and the ancient law of surrender ringing through both their wolves, the law that said yield or die, the law that predated language and politics and the complicated machinery of civilization. Gregor yielded. His body went limp beneath Cale's weight. His wolf submitted. The fight left him the way heat leaves a body, in slow degrees, until what remained was a man on a stone floor with nothing left to bargain with. Cale shifted back, stood over Gregor. His arm was bleeding. His ribs ached. His wolf settled into a quiet that was not exhaustion, but completeness. "It is over," Cale said. Gregor lay on the stone. He did not speak. There was nothing left to say. Dawn came. The compound smelled like smoke and copper, and the raw earth smell of shifted wolves returning to human form. The battle was done. Gregor's forces had surrendered or fled. The Stonebrook and Blackwater wolves, once they saw their benefactor pinned and beaten, had laid down their weapons with the speed of men who had been fighting someone else's war and were grateful for the excuse to stop. Cale sat on the steps of the great hall, not the throne. The steps. His arm was bandaged. His body ached in the specific way that a 47-year-old body aches after a night of fighting, which is to say comprehensively and without mercy. Sarah walked out of the eastern gate. Her tactical vest was torn. The bandage on her side was soaked through with red. Her silver hair was matted with sweat and dust, and her wolf was still close to the surface, still humming beneath her skin, visible in the faint luminous quality of her eyes. She crossed the courtyard, sat beside him on the steps. Her shoulder touched his. The contact was warm. The surviving alphas came forward. Marcus Cole, with a cut across his forehead and his usual silence. Diana Cross, with blood on her hands and a calm that belied the violence of the night. Owen Thorne, standing behind Sarah with the quiet steadiness of a man who had followed his alpha into war and would do it again without being asked. They did not kneel to Cale. They knelt to them, to the pair, to the Alpha King and the Alpha Queen, bonded and bloodied and standing on the steps of a fortress that had been built for loneliness and was loneliness no longer. Marcus spoke first. One sentence. The council recognizes the bond. Diana nodded. Unanimously. Jonah stood at the doorway of the great hall. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed, and his face held an expression that Cale had never seen on it before. Not relief, not pride. Something quieter. Something that looked like the expression of a man who had been holding his breath for 20 years and had finally been given permission to exhale. Cale caught his eye. Neither spoke. Jonah nodded. One nod. A single dip of the chin that carried an apology for the things he had said in the study, and a forgiveness for the things Cale had said back, and 20 years of brotherhood compressed into a gesture so small that anyone who did not know them would have missed it entirely. Cale turned to Sarah. Gray at his temples, blood on his knuckles, the bond mark on his throat visible above his collar, warm and steady as a pulse. She sat beside him with her wounded side, and her unwavering eyes, and the crooked half-smile of a woman who had walked into a stranger's fortress a week ago and walked out of a war as its queen. "Told you I was waiting," she said. He kissed her forehead, pulled her closer. She leaned into him, and his wolf settled against his ribs, and for the first time in 23 years, the silence inside him was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of enough. The wolves of Iron Howl and Ashfall and Hollowfield and Riverbend moved through the compound in the early light, tending wounds, clearing debris, beginning the work of rebuilding what the night had broken. And on the steps of the great hall, the Alpha King who had believed he was too old and too late, sat with the woman who had crossed a territory to find him, and neither of them moved for a very long time, because there was nowhere else to be. The goddess had not forgotten him. She had just been waiting too.